Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. For all of you who are here and waiting, thank you so much for your patience while we figure out some internet difficulties, but we are so excited to have you join us today. With me, I have Mr. Ken Brenner, who is going to be sharing about the AP Social Studies exams with all of you. My name is Anna Richmond, and I work with Tutor.com and the Princeton Review to ensure that all of you have access to academic resources that you need all year round. Throughout the course of this presentation, please put in any questions or comments that you have into the chat or the Q&A feature. Do not be afraid to pop that in. We want to make sure we are answering as many of your questions throughout as possible and can also answer some at the end for those of you who would prefer that. And with that, I'll let Ken go ahead and we will get started. Thank you for joining today.
All right, Anna, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for being patient as we got rolling here. So you're here this evening or whatever time of day it is if you're watching this recording later for an AP Social Studies strategy webinar. So this webinar is going to cover three main areas. The first one is, why in the world would someone want to take AP exams? The second is, what's the basic structure of an AP Social Studies exam? And third, what strategy points could we give you or your student towards mastering this exam? So my name is Ken. I've been with Princeton Review for about 16 years now. And this company has been helping students for over 40 years achieve their college dreams when it comes to standardized testing. So we start the evening with why take AP exams. And I want to echo what Anna said. If you have questions for me, please feel free to enter them in the chat or the Q&A at any time. I will stop for questions occasionally, but you should ask a question as soon as you have it. And even if I'm in the middle of speaking, I will stop or Anna will let me know that there is a question and we will integrate it. Please don't feel like you need to wait until we stop and ask for questions. So the number one reason that students look into or take AP exams is the fact that they can earn college credit. Generally speaking, you will get college credit for a score of 3 or higher. AP exams are scored from 1 to 5. So achieve a 3 or higher, and at some or most schools, you will be eligible. You become more eligible the higher you get towards 5. Now, the reason that credit matters is it's going to be applied to the courses that the college requires. So every single college pretty much has about, let's call it 30, let's see, two years, has about 2 years, a semester and a half up to 2 semesters. Sorry, that's not what I mean. 3 to 4 semesters of core classes that you need to do regardless of the degree you're going for. Well, if you take an AP exam in that area, you can have it applied and that will knock out that competency. So if you take, for instance, a push and you get a 3 or better in it, it can cancel out one of the 2 required history courses. Therefore, you get to skip that class, which is great because the first 2 years of college for many students are not complete repetitions of what we saw in high school, but it is a lot of liberal arts. It is science, math, history, English, maybe some language or fine art requirement. And so by getting to skip those, you can sort of get to your major faster. So let's say that what you really want to do in college is criminal justice. The more AP exams you can score a 3 or better on, the more introductory classes you'll get credit for and can skip, and the faster you'll get into the nuts and bolts of criminal justice, the thing you're most interested in. So, and additionally, if you get a handful of AP scores 3 or better, there's a great chance then you might be able to knock out a whole semester of college entirely if you want to speed that process up and get into the workforce sooner. So there's a lot of benefits to taking these exams. Now, any one of the social studies exams could be used for usually some social sciences requirement. Now, each exam is only offered once each year in the spring, barring a given makeup date. So in the social studies, US government and microeconomics this year is Monday, May 6th. Human geography is Tuesday, May 7th. Comparative government is Wednesday, May 8th. European history, APUSH, and macroeconomics is Friday, May 10th. And world history is Wednesday, May 15th. Because these exams are only offered once a year, and you're going to sign up for them in the year you're probably doing the AP course, you really want to be organized and put your best foot forward. You don't want to be in a spot where, we don't get the score that we want. And then to do the exam next year, a whole year later, when you're not doing the course anymore, is going to be very tricky. So know these dates and plan back from it. So those are the dates. Generally speaking, I just see a question. Oh, okay. I see that Anna's addressing it. Thank you, Anna. Okay. Now, AP exams are scored, as I said before, on 1 through 5. And what they basically are saying is College Board, the folks who create the AP courses and the AP exams, are saying, hey, if you score a 3 on our European history exam, that's a college course grade equivalent of a B minus, C plus, or a C. And as far as we're concerned, we're telling colleges that this student has a qualified level of understanding and they can be moved on to the next level of that subject matter. Not every college automatically accepts a 3. Many do, but more competitive schools will only want a 4 or a 5. If you get a 2, most schools, almost all of them, won't offer credit for that. But there are edge cases where, someone is able to show that they got an exceptionally high grade in the course and is able to just explain that they have test anxiety or an accommodation. But to keep things simple, you want a 3. And if you have really competitive programs, you want a 4 or a 5. So that's just understand what the equivalents for these grades are. And then colleges have free reign to decide if that's good enough for them or not. So the goal is to try to at least earn that 3. So now we understand why we would take AP exams, what their benefits are, and the minimum score we're going for. So if you have questions, remember you have both the chat and the Q&A. I can see both of them. Anna can see both of them. Enter your questions at any time. Now, we'll talk about understanding a little bit about how these exams are broken down. According to college boards, the purpose of AP exams is to show competency in the material covered by an introductory college course in that exam subject. So you're not showing that you've mastered everything there could be to know about microeconomics. You are saying through this test that you know enough about the subject that it counts as a credit and a prerequisite for anything else that required that subject. So in order to do this, College Board needs to make sure that the AP exam tests a reasonable amount of the content and skills regarding a topic someone would amass in a freshman first-year college course. The way they do this is by organizing the exam to test the central themes that are connected to those ideas. So one of the most popular social studies exams is APUSH, AP US History. The big ideas covered there are 8 big ideas covered by APUSH. You see them on screen, but it covers sort of how America forged its identity, how technology and labor developed, how we interacted with the environment and expanded our borders, the various movements of migration and settling in different areas, the political structure of the country and power within that structure, America's interaction with the world, America's broken up into different regions and compared that way, things like East versus West, North versus South, and the social structures that existed containing things like civil rights and roles performed by different people. So what the exam does is every series of questions is generally focusing on one, potentially more of these big ideas, but at least one of them. Now that we get the idea of the big ideas, we can apply them to others. In AP Euro, we have the interaction of Europe and the rest of the world. So colonizing, poverty and prosperity deals with economics. Objective knowledge and subjective visions deals with fact versus opinion, or how people viewed themselves versus the reality. States and other institutions of power is sort of how each state came to be defined. Individual and society is how an individual would interact with their government and organize societal structure. And national and European identity is just like national American identity, what became central to each nation state. And finally, technology and science deals with innovation and things like the Industrial Revolution and so on. These are very big, wide-arcing themes. You'll see it again in a moment. I'll show you when we get a little bit later into the meeting why this is a good thing. In AP World, a very similar breakdown, right? Humans and the environment, cultural developments and interactions, governance, economic systems, social interactions and organization, and technology and innovation. You're going to notice, right, that all of these basically are government, economics, societal structure, technology, development of culture, and the environment. These are, occasionally you're going to talk also about politics, but there's a lot of similarity here. US government only has 4 big ideas, so a lot of stuff with sort of the founding documents and the founding fathers, how the 3 branches of government interact, the freedoms and rights that citizens are granted, and then political ideologies and beliefs, sort of the different ways people think about interpreting the Constitution and stances on rights and law. And then, of course, political participation connected with everything connected with the history of voting and elections. Finally, micro and macroeconomics have big ideas as well. The biggest differences here is that microeconomics, right, is focusing much more on the actual production, sale of goods. It focuses on the interaction between consumer, good, and producer. Macroeconomics focuses on the interconnectedness of multiple economic systems, how one market affects another, the way we measure different countries' economic output, and models and policies. So here's the first thing. Number one, the ideal social study, first of all, remember, you probably only ever would want to do 2 different AP social studies exams over the course of, say, sophomore, junior, senior year, because most colleges only have 2 social science competencies. You might do more of them if you know you're going to push for a social science degree. Deciding which of these to do should be a combination. The ideal is it be something that you're already good at and something that you already want to invest in. So if you've struggled with economics and you're not planning to go into economics, you would take one of the history or government exams instead. As best as we can, let's go into like a summary of the exam structure. So this is for all of the history exams. All the history exams follow the structure you see on screen. 55 minutes with 55 multiple choice questions, each arranged in a set of 3 to 6 questions or so. Then section 1, part B is 40 minutes with 3 short answer questions. There are I believe there's 4 and you have to answer 3 of them. And then finally, section 2 is 1 hour and 40 minutes, including a 15-minute reading period of the document-based question, which is here's a series of 8 to 12 documents. So the 15-minute reading period is sort of, you can decide how you want to use it, but you sort of look through each document. And then you're asked to defend an argument related to history using as many of the documents as possible. We'll get into the exact numbers later. You also write a long essay chosen out of 3 possibilities. You choose one. And the long essay, just so you know, is going to be written solely from your knowledge of history. So just be aware that this is the breakdown history will follow. Governments is a little bit different. The questions are a little bit more involved with more reading. So it's still 55 multiple choice, but you actually get an hour and 20 minutes. And for the essays, you only get 1 hour to write 4 short freestyle response questions. So the application of a concept, analyzing quantitative data, you doing a comparison based on the Supreme Court of the United States, and an argument essay where you write about and defend some argument related to US government. On the comparative government exam, shockingly, there is a comparative government essay rather than a SCOTUS comparison because it's not only US centric. On the economics exams, I know this is like thrilling, but it's good data to have. You have 1 hour and 10 minutes for both macro and micro's multiple choice. It's 60 multiple choice. We also included for these the percents of score. So the multiple choice is a very big deal on the economics test. And then you have a single hour, including a 10-minute reading period, to do 1 long freestyle response question and 2 short freestyle response questions that may ask you to illustrate economic interactions using words and potentially diagrams. So those are your basic breakdowns. If you have any questions on those structures, don't forget about the chat and the Q&A. I'll give everyone a moment and then we'll move on to the next module. Okay, here we go. So let's go ahead with the third piece here. Now, in the time we have, we're certainly not going to cover every last thing you could ever see on any one of these 7 or 8 tests, but we can give you some general tips that will apply to these exams and really all AP exams. And we can give some really specific test taking techniques. A lot of my examples tonight will focus on the 3 history exams, European, world, and US, but please understand that the advice will work on a government exam and an economic exam because this is about strategy. The content will mostly come from the work the student does in their course. So let's keep at it. First, for all AP social studies, you want a blend of understanding the global strategies, we'll get to that, knowing the types of questions that can show up on your specific test, understanding what you do for each question type, and understanding what are called AP's reasoning skills. So we can spend a while on these AP reasoning skills. They vary from one test to the other, but generally they involve the ability to compare and contrast different time periods or organizations, the ability to contextualize and explain the events or factors that may have caused something to happen, the ability, so compare and contrast, contextualize. There's also the ability to analyze, right? Which is sort of not just to sort of be able to explain um different to look at different pieces of historical evidence, right? Or economic evidence and understand their impact. And the last thing usually is going to be connected to chronological reasoning, understanding sort of a basic cause and effect. So compare and contrast, contextualization, chronological reasoning, and analyzing sources and evidence. So let's talk about global strategies. If I were to ask all of you, what is the capital of Malawi? That's probably not information you have at the tip of your fingers. It is just not a capital most people know. But if I were to ask you what is the capital of Malawi and give you four options, Paris, London, Amsterdam, Lilongwe, you'd probably get that the answer is Lilongwe. But it's not because you all of a sudden know that. It's because you know that it's not Paris, London, or Amsterdam. So that's our first thing. The skill of process of elimination is a student's ability to eliminate the three flawed answers. And when you think about a social studies exam, when you think about trying to remember everything that's happened in 250 years of American governmental history, or you're trying to keep track of about 20 different civilizations in world history, you're so unlikely to have every piece of knowledge at your fingertips, even if you've done really well in your course with an amazing AP instructor. But if you can invalidate three things just for not fitting the time period or not being consistent with that economic rule or interaction, you can get the questions right. So most of what you see tonight will be us solving questions using the process of elimination. Going along with the idea that you won't always remember everything, you need to have a good strategy for guessing. If you come across a problem where you're totally stumped, or you come across a problem where you just get rid of some, but then you're stuck, some students will randomly guess and they'll sort of just put in an answer, everywhere. The problem with this strategy is twofold. One, you could get very unlucky, but two, and miss them all. But two, if you spend time coming up with a random guess, you're spending time on a problem you shouldn't. Once you realize you need to guess on a problem, you don't want to spend any more time. So what we recommend is you pick a letter, A, B, C, or D, before the exam begins. And on every single problem that you are not going to do because you run out of time or you just don't know it, we say you should put in C. There's two advantages to that. Number one, not only does that score higher because you won't fail, you won't miss all the problems you guess on due to luck. You'll get at least some of them because College Board uses each answer about the same. The point of this really is that it's quicker. It's quicker to just say, oh, I'm stuck. I'm putting in C, rather than saying, oh, I'm stuck. Let me look at it for a while and spend valuable time that I don't have. So we use POE to get questions right, but when we get stuck, either we're stuck in the beginning or we're stuck after spending a while on it, we quickly throw in our letter of the day and move on. So on the 3 history exams, as well as a little bit on the government exams, your questions do not appear in isolation. On the economics exams, they do. But for the most part, your questions come with primary sources. So sometimes they come with secondary sources, but what you are going to get some short text or example. Generally speaking, you probably don't want to or need to read this text immediately until you see what the questions want you to do. So one thing you could get for your multiple choice questions is a primary source that they're based on. That's the most common. The most common type of question you could get on a primary source question is a specific question, something that just wants a detail. The excerpt provided discusses global turbulence and the desire for freedom of mankind in reference to which of the following events. The last thing you want to do looking for this answer is go into this text and spend a lot of time expecting that answer to be there. Instead, look at who said it and when it was said. This is John F. Kennedy in 1961. So I'm going to look at these answers, right? And I'm talking about global turbulence and the desire for the freedom of mankind. Right off the bat, this is not the women's suffrage movement. The women's suffrage movement occurs at different stages in each country's lifespan and is not a global issue. The Great Depression is not the 1960s. And finally, the civil rights movement is also, if we look here, right? If we look at this, like just the idea, the civil rights movement is not the subject of the speech. If you get down to these two and you know they're both in the 1960s, start skimming the text. A grand and global alliance, North and South, East and West, only a few generations have been granted the role of defending freedom. This is not the civil rights movement then. This is most certainly the Cold War, which is the right answer to the question. So I don't need to read the text a lot. I only need to know where are we in history and what big idea are we talking about. The next question format you could get after that standard one is a not or except question. 6, the author indicates that all of the following led to the revolution except. If you're taking the paper and pencil exam, cross the word except out. If you're taking the digital exam, write the letters A, B, C, D on your scratch paper. And in either case, we want to indicate the things that are true as a yes. So think about where we are. World War I's 1914 to 1919. So I'm going to say that did have something to do with the outbreak of World War I. I'll mark it with a yes. I know maybe that the Russian Revolution is about classes. So I'm going to say that it's got something leading to that. D, a decline in the rate of industrialization. B, the failure of autocratic government. Wait a minute. You should know that in World War I, all of Europe is still benefiting from everything that happened during the Industrial Revolution. No way is the rate of industrialization slowing down. That's a no. But the failure of the autocratic government Well, you might know that the Russian Revolution is based on some failure. So the way to do these when you see not accept on any of these exams is make 3 answers a yes and choose the odd man out, the no. Everything else you know to be true of either the revolution or 1917, probably, but you know that D does not match the big picture of that era. Instead of a primary source, the history exams will occasionally have political cartoons, whereas the economic exams could have like a diagram to work off of. So let's take a look at some of these illustration-based problems. Here, we have an 1899 illustration, and we have Hannah, McKinley, and Clay, and we might know that McKinley was a president. And in this, Hannah's speaking to McKinley. So look at the question. What does the political cartoon above imply that? Well, I don't know who here tonight really studied Hannah, McKinley, and Henry Clay, but you don't need to. A, McKinley was the first president to favor big interest openly. Just if you know that McKinley is somewhere around 1900, it's very unlikely that in 124 years before that, no one favored big interest first. And the cartoon doesn't seem to reference big business. B, by the 1890s, Henry Clay's political approach had lost favor with the electorate. We definitely have Hannah insulting Clay, but we really don't know if the electorate had lost anything here. C, McKinley's presidential campaign was masterminded by Marcus Hanna. Well, at the very least, Hannah's saying something to McKinley, and they're both involved here. So keep it. And then D, Marcus Hanna single-handedly controlled all 3 branches. Guys, even if you didn't love American history, if Marcus Hanna was ever in control of all 3 branches, you'd probably remember that. So we're going to go with C, and it is the right answer. So again, I need to know some stuff. I need to remember generally what happened, but I don't need to know every last piece of history or social studies or economics. On the history exams mostly, and a little more rarely on the government exams, you might get maps. So you should first understand what's going on in the map. We have the voyage map of Ibn Battuta and Marco Polo's travels in the 13th and 14th centuries. I see that Marco Polo is the dotted line. And I see that Ibn Battuta is the solid line. I also see that they explore a lot of the same areas, but Marco Polo doesn't really go to Africa. Nor does he go as north in Eastern Europe. Whereas Marco Polo, I can see, goes pretty north in Asia. Okay, so that's all I get. According to the map above, how does the voyage of Ibn Battuta compare to that of Marco Polo? Well, first we have Marco Polo began his journey before Ibn Battuta. Look at how this is even phrased, right? 13th and 14th, Ibn Battuta is first. You just need to generally remember that this is out of order. It's the wrong direction. Ibn Battuta spent considerable time on the Swahili coast while that area was largely avoided by Marco Polo. If I look, there is absolutely truth that Ibn Battuta was down here and Marco Polo was not. Let's leave it. Unlike Ibn Battuta, Marco Polo's voyage explored the port cities of China. I see both lines involved in China at some point. And finally, Ibn Battuta's voyage took him through the Islamic lands, unlike the voyage of Marco Polo. But if I look, both of them, in fact, Marco Polo might cut more directly through the Islamic lands. If I just generally know where these things are, I'm able to POE down to what I can see. I did not need to be an expert on either of these gentlemen's escapades. Now, it is occasional that all 3 types of tests, history, government, and economics, could give you a chart to work with. Understand that more than one answer might be true, but only one will be supported by the information in the chart. So I've got some presidents from 53 to 74 in the States, and they're Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, and I've got their average approval rating, the highest ever recorded and the lowest ever recorded. So Eisenhower was the most consistently popular president in the nation's history. I agree that Eisenhower had I don't know, I'm not even sure. Uh, he didn't have the highest approval rating. He didn't have he didn't have the best low approval rating, but also the chart's only about 4 presidents. So I couldn't say that. Kennedy received greater congressional support, but the chart, look how it says the conclusion needs to be drawn from the chart. The chart doesn't talk about congressional support. C, Nixon's approval rating was the result of the Watergate scandal. I know that the Watergate scandal effectively ends Nixon's presidential career, and I see that it's really low, but the chart doesn't tell me that this is because of Watergate. So I can't pick that answer either. The difference between Johnson's highest and lowest approval ratings were the greatest for any president during the period in question. Yeah, they were. The discrepancy in Johnson is 44, and no other president has a gap that big. Even Nixon is 43. Eisenhower and Kennedy are even lower. So what you guys see, and that's got to be D then, is the questions are designed to make it look like you should use all your historical knowledge, but really you should use your general knowledge and the grasp of the big picture to POE through the questions hyper efficiently. Now, here's what you won't see. On history exams, you are not going to be asked specifically about military history. On government exams, you're going to be asked about major court cases, but you're not going to be asked about trite details from cases no one ever heard of. On economic exams, you'll be asked about general economic policy and economic interactions, but you're not going to be very specifically asked about some Panamanian recession in 2006. So you are not going to see what we would call very, very, very basic rote memorization. You don't get stuff about military history, and you don't get stuff that can only answered by just recalling a fact like a school test would. The questions are always going to be in the context of larger historical trends. We've already talked about process of elimination, but it's the best way to knock these questions out. So let's switch gears. I know we just spent a lot of time on US history. Let's look at world for a second. Here's a world history text. We have Mansa Musa in 1324. He's the king of Mali, the most famous king of Mali. If I get a question like 51, where I don't really remember anything about the pilgrimages that Mansa Musa took, then I will look in the text. And if I look here, when I went out to meet him, I'm picking where I see him like a fully coherent thought or argument. On behalf of the mighty Sultan Al-Malik al-Nasir, he did me extreme honor and treated me with the greatest courtesy. He addressed me, however, only through an interpreter, despite his ability to speak in the Arabic tongue. Then he forwarded me to the royal treasure many loads of unworked native gold and other valuables. So the visit taken by Mansa Musa, right, is talking about how they treated each other with respect and courtesy, and now there was some type of maybe exchange made, right? And so I want an answer consistent with that. Nothing here talked about religion being repressed. Similarly, it's the opposite of intolerance. And finally, the economics stagnating or like being stuck or held in place, none of that's consistent. But cultural diffusion, one culture spreading out and interacting with another, is exactly what's described here. That's all I needed to know. You also should know that on all of these exams, regardless of topic, they do rely on a student applying a heavy dose of common sense, which explains the most important effect tobacco cultivation had on the development of the Chesapeake Bay settlements during the 17th century. Okay, I might not remember everything here, but look at these options, right? I'm just going to jump around a little bit. B, the immediate commercial success of the tobacco forced the settlers to defend against attacks by Spanish and French settlers. If the Spanish and French attacking a bunch of American colonists for tobacco happened, you would know that no matter how much history you did or didn't take. Also, look at D, British customs established in the region to regulate tobacco trade led to widespread resentment of the British by the colonists. That almost works, but we're in the 17th century, the 1600s. So the colonists don't hate the British yet. And finally, tobacco provided the settlers a lucrative crop to trade with nearby Native American tribes. Sadly to say, we did not use these crops for trading. That was not our interaction with Native American tribes. So the answer's got to be A. And you know, it makes sense because we're talking about settlements. And we know that once the colonists arrived, they spread through the country pretty rapidly. Again, another way to work these problems is to use context. So if we look at this one, right, we're 1789, right? And if we look here, we're talking about things in the passage like the third estate. This is drawn up, and contextually, boy, this looks like French. So the dialogue here is not about an explorer starting a journey. This is not about trade at all. And this is not about a peasant petitioning the government. This is someone who's a little bit more fluent than you would expect a peasant to be, nor is this talking about necessarily something being repressive. But we do have a lot spoken about different classes and privileges and nobility. That would seem to be that the answer is C. And again, just based on a couple of the things you see me boxing off, there is a very strong likelihood that we were talking about French, especially the time period, right? Is consistent with, you may or may not know, the French Revolution. Okay. So the next one is a little bit longer, talking about different types of skills, but I will go through the skills rather than solving the questions. I told you that one of the skills was chronological reasoning, being able to understand a chain of events, what came before, during, and after. Then we have comparison and contextualization, which is sort of being able to say what's similar or different between different time periods, societies, or economic systems. Creating and supporting a historical argument is, here's some idea, how would you support it, or how does this evidence back up an idea? And then historical imitation and synthesis, I think I called it analysis before, is being able to look at some event and understand how multiple things work together to cause some change. These are the four main things you'll be asked to do. So for all multiple choice, mostly you're going to be tied to a set of 2 to 5 questions, 3 to 5 questions, which are tied to primary sources, secondary sources, historical issues, or diagrams and illustrations. Always look for big picture answers, things that don't match a time period, don't match a government system, don't match some economic rule. Use process of elimination and allow common sense and context clues to aid you in the elimination of bad answers. Now, let's quickly talk about the short answer, and then we'll wrap up with the essays. Understand that with the short answers, the basics go. This is for the history exams. You need to answer 3 of 4 short answer questions. 2 of them will come with some element of choice, allowing you to pick the topic or theme you feel better writing about. All of them are tied back to some source, argument, or data. These are short answers, so you only need to write facts. You do not need to create a thesis. You have 40 minutes on the history exams to answer 3 of them. And then you'll have 3 minutes to brainstorm ideas and about 10 minutes to write each one. That's about how the time breaks down, but you can spend it however you like. Choose the essay you feel most comfortable about. Write down a list of the facts and details you can recall about the topic, and then write 2 to 3 paragraphs consisting of about 2 to 3 sentences each. So just to kind of show that, here's a quick example of it, just so it's on the recording. I have a quotation from Jeremy Black's Crisis of Empire, and I have to answer parts A, B, and C. Explain one example of rebellion, explain one cause of the rebellion, explain one effect of the rebellion. So what someone might do is choose the Stamp Act, the Townshend Revenue Act, the Sugar Act, and the Tea Act. These are different acts that are part of this rebellion. If I chose the Tea Act, I might say, so I know I should write about the East India Tea Company, the Boston Tea Party, the Sons of Liberty, the Intolerable Acts, the closing of Boston Harbor. And then this is an example of a perfectly great short answer response, where literally the student just jumps right into it. Paragraph 1 is 3 fact-based sentences. Paragraph 2 is 2 fact-based sentences. And 2. And again, a cause has been given. And the acts have been identified, cause has been given, effects have been given. This is perfect. Between questions 3 and 4, they're always going to be from 2 different time periods. So the odds are good that you will know one of them. This is an example of what 3 and 4 might look like. And then, and I know we are up against the time here. Let's talk very briefly about the DBQ and the long essay. In the document-based question, you're going to be given around 6 or 7 documents that come from all aspects of history, either US, world, or European. They're usually going to be centered around the same range of history. And the goal is to choose an argument and then the pieces, the excerpts that best support your argument. And know that the highest graded DBQ responses will contain 2 pieces of outside information that wasn't in any of the 6 or 7 source texts. Here, you have College Board scoring rubric saying you get a point for having a strong argument. You have a point for connecting your argument to broader historical events that were going on at the time. You can get 2 points from quoting 6 documents, and a 3rd point from adding at least 1 extra piece of specific historical evidence. And finally, you can get a point from connecting 3 of the documents, from analyzing the how or why the point of view or audience of the argument is relevant to the prompt, and 1 point for showing that you have a complex understanding of the historical development. That is, analyzing something from multiple variables, or sort of just considering alternate viewpoints. So if I take a document that a 18th century laborer wrote, I might include a sentence about what the viewpoint of the companies was during that same period. So understand exactly what the question is asking. Make sure you use 6 documents. Make sure you demonstrate that you understand what's happening in each one, and try to organize your documents into groups. A great way to do it if you want to write 3-body paragraphs is to take 6 documents and make 3 pairs of 2, right? Very, very strong way to do it. Here's some more information about us backing that up, about having 3 or more groupings. This slide in the recording, you can view it a little bit more. We'll talk more about how you would group them. Make sure your 3 groupings are different. And then an example is included here of like how someone might brainstorm a DBQ. Documents in the DBQ usually appear in chronological order. If not, they're done in such a way that they're comparing and contrasting viewpoints. Figuring out where the documents came from could help you with that extra point for analysis. And do not mistake, a really good essay that scores well will not discount counter evidence. It will consider the opposite side of the argument and address it somewhere. The long essay, guys, on the other hand, is going to be from the student's memory. And here are some examples of long essay questions. The goal here is to really try to pay attention during the multiple choice. Whichever topic showed up more during the multiple choice is probably the one you want to choose to write about. Here's a rubric for the long essay. It's a very similar rubric, but obviously there's no points for documents. It's thesis, contextualization. It's using specific and relevant evidence to support an argument. And then you need to be talking about, you need to sort of reference comparison, causation, or change in continuity over time and connect it to your argument. And then again, you need to analyze that multiple perspective thing. That is also a focus here. This is some advice about which question to choose and how you should write your essay. So sort of just talking about, you should always choose the thing that you can remember more about. And then you should read the question, choose a thesis based on what information you have. It's dangerous to come up with a thesis first because you might write about something that you know nothing about. So write those facts down and figure out the thesis from there. And remember, good long essays, DBQs, long essays are 5 paragraphs long. Intro, 3 bodies, and a conclusion. The best way to succeed on an AP exam is knowing the content of the exam, but just remember that AP exams are still standardized tests. You need to know how to beat a standardized test. So make sure, whether it's working with the Princeton Review or Tutor.com, or it's independently studying, make sure you have a plan for how you're going to master the content and the strategy. And I thank any of you who stuck it out these extra 3 minutes. I thank Anna for keeping us stable while I was unfortunately having connectivity issues. We thank all of you for being here tonight, and I want to open the floor up for any questions that you could ask in the chat or the Q&A. Otherwise, I'll turn it back over to Anna to make her closing comments.
Thank you so much, Ken, for sharing your expertise with us today. I know this was beneficial for all of us who are coming in, and from Jennifer even saying this really helps. Thank you. So we are so excited to be a resource for you. If you are joining because your library, your school, your college, prospective college offers Tutor.com or the Princeton Review resources, you can connect with us through your establishment's Tutor.com or Princeton Review platform to receive continuing support from us and our teams. If you have any other questions, oh, here we go. Does the APUSH test favor any units in particular?
Yes. While Anna is speaking, I will get some percentages down for you. I'm gonna try to say the name right, Tahimia, and please let me know if I have that wrong.
And yes, and we'll read that out on the recording as well.
So APUSH largely, I'll type this in. APUSH shows a preference for 1754 to 1980. Now I know that sounds like a ridiculously wide range, but basically it doesn't focus on much of like the colonial era before tensions start rising. There might be 3 questions pre 1754. It also does not focus on the modern times at all. There's only going to be a few questions that are after the Cold War. Now, besides that, if there's any way to break that down further, center your study around the wars, right? Many things that are asked about are based on the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, World Wars I and II, and the Cold War. That doesn't mean that none of the questions matter, like in the era of good feelings in the 1820s, but many things that happened in American history are driven by wars or the result of wars. So that's where if you want to restrict that window a little further, that's what I would say.
Yes, and the other question here for the counter argument in DBQ essays, how long does that have to be? Can it be just a sentence or does it have to be longer?
It can literally just be 2 sentences towards the latter part of one of your body paragraphs, Pedro. So, if let's say that I've used 2 documents, a letter written by a suffragette calling for women's equal rights, and a speech given by some male politician arguing for very traditional gender roles. You can take those 2 documents and explain the disparity in power between those who wanted the change and didn't want the change. And then at the end of that body paragraph, you could say, there was an argument to be made at the time for the stability by each gender staying within its particular norms, that with societal upheaval comes a downturn in the economy. However, etc. Right? So just 2 sentences to sort of introduce the counter. And then remember, you probably want to shoot it down to support your argument in the end. 2 sentences is my answer there.
Great, thank you, Ken. And before we wrap up today, if any of you have questions, we will stick around to answer those for you. For those joining us on the recording, thank you so much for watching this through. We hope it'll help you on your AP exams as you begin to prepare. And remember to come to PrincetonReview.com or Tutor.com for all of your tutoring needs leading up to test day.